I'm very pleased to inform that today, Judge Diaz, who sat in the 11th District Court in Miami, Dade County, delivered final judgment to Trinidad and Tobago. The final judgment is the following sum: $131,318,840.47 United States dollars. That represents over 1 billion or near 1 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. I haven't spoken previously as the matter was before the judge to settle the final order. As the nation is aware, on the 29th of March 2023, a 6-person jury concluded with a verdict of guilt in respect of 3 defendants. The 3 defendants in the Miami proceedings are Mr. Raul Gutierrez Jr., Mr. Brian Quaitung, former Minister of Finance, and Mr. Steve Ferguson. The case presented by Trinidad and Tobago included evidence which was taken on deposition, meaning recorded evidence taken years ago. And we heard from me as a live witness. We heard from a gentleman named Mr. Ronald Burke, who in fact was a person who went and served time in U.S. federal prison for his acts of guilt in the Piarco matter. We heard from Mr. Eduardo Hillman Waller, who also went to federal prison for his participation in crimes against the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the Piarco matter. We heard from Margaret McDowell Thompson, who was the person who was then at NIPDEC, who gave live evidence in the month of March in the Piarco civil case. We heard from Ms. Karen Fornillier, who is currently at the Airports Authority, who gave live evidence. We heard from Mr. Leonardo Mora Rodriguez by way of his deposition evidence. He too also served time in federal prison in the United States of America for his participation in crimes. But the evidence of guilt and the actual confessions as to how this conspiracy unfolded came from the witnesses themselves. Mr. Raul Gutierrez Jr. specifically confessed in criminal proceedings and in plea agreements entered in the United States courts. Mr. Eduardo Hillman Waller similarly testified and provided evidence which he laid out in guilty pleas, which now stand in the public record. We also heard from Mr. Ronald Burke. Mr. Ronald Burke gave live evidence at the time of the recording of his deposition, and there were plea agreements, etc. And he also confessed and gave details of exactly who he coordinated with and transpired with and worked with in carrying out conspiracies. We heard from Mr. Leonardo Mora, who again also provided a guilty plea and testified to his participation with the persons that conspired and in fact caused damage to Trinidad and Tobago. In the steps to be taken ahead right now, today the challenges to the verdict are complete. Today, Judge Diaz's finalization of the judgment means that the request for a new trial cannot happen. The request for what the American courts call a directed verdict have been closed off and denied. All of those matters have now been put behind us. Subject to certain technical challenges, the real thing in front of us right now is the potential of an appeal. An appeal is heard to the 3rd District Court in the United States. There's a constitutional right of appeal, but there is no appeal, and there is no appeal as I speak to you now. What happens is the state is now going to take the step to pursue its costs as well as the recovery of its judgment. Now, the judgment that has been awarded is what we call in law joint and several liability. It means that all 3 persons are exposed to paying the sum, not in 1/3 shares, but you can receive the entire sum from any one of the 3 and all of the 3. It's up to them as to how they're going to treat with the civil liability between themselves. What the state is going to do is to pursue its options. Right now, we have the ability in the United States. There's a very detailed process by which the defendants must inform the court of all of their assets. The judgments are in the course of being registered today across counties, etc., so that any personal or other property that belongs to defendants will be caught automatically. And in the course of enforcement, there is something called extraterritorial reach. I want to remind you that this is a United States court judgment. They have the ability to enforce in the United States, and there are mechanisms to enforce it outside of the United States. That is to follow money and assets. To stop the execution of a judgment, I'd like to inform that the defendants will have to put up a bond for the entire judgment. That is the near $1 billion of Trinidad and Tobago exposure, as well as 2 years' interest. So if there's to be a stop on the execution, the defendants will have to place a bond to stop execution whilst they appeal, and that will have to be for the entire sum of the judgment plus 2 years' interest. As I've told you before, we've calculated the interest to run at $9 million US per year per annum.